Good evening. Welcome to this program that's sponsored by the Neighborhoods Committee. As I said at the Residents Council meeting last month, we've been focusing on First Hill, and we wanted to have a program that featured Cascade Media because they've moved to the old Child Haven building. We haven't quite figured out what that might be, but fortunately, John and Jeff were at a event sponsored by Cascade Media, and Knute said, I could come and talk to Horizon House again. So we've jumped on that, and we're really happy. During COVID, we contacted Cascade Media and asked if we could show some of the Mossback films here that had to do with neighborhoods in Seattle, and they were generous in letting us use those films. So thank you so much for that. You entertained us during a time we were locked in our room, so thank you. You're very entertaining, so we're excited to have you here tonight. And so one of the nice things about the Neighborhoods Committee is people have connections and can arrange for people to come and speak here, which is fabulous. Sometimes it's a subgroup of the committee that says we want to learn more about a place, and they really dig in for a few months and find out about a neighborhood. So it's that combination of connections and hard work that makes some of these programs so interesting. John's going to do the official introduction, but welcome. Thank you for your gift of your program.
Well, it's not supposed to be me tonight. It's supposed to be Jeff. But as many of you know, probably, Jeff had surgery today. In the old days, they would have said that he had his mouth wired shut. They don't do wires anymore. They use rubber bands. So it was a little bit funnier to say he has his mouth rubber band together. So he can go like this, but that's all. And he's feeling miserable upstairs, and he's not coming down. So I will start, and I want to start by telling you a story that I overheard. It was Jeff was standing here at the Fireside Lounge yesterday when, what's his name, Bob Crowley came up to him and said, I hear you're having Mossback tomorrow. And Jeff said, well, yes, we are. He said, oh, I just feel so bad I can't make it. You know, he's one of my heroes. And I said to myself, why would he be one of your heroes? And then I thought, you know, he's turned these 10-minute segments of television into as good entertainment as the hour-long program itself. And we really appreciate it. And I think that's worth hero making. And tonight, he's going to do not a 10-minute one, but a 30-minute one on Asahel Curtis. Asahel Curtis. And he's the brother of Edward Curtis, who is probably more famous, but I think we'll tell maybe not as talented or maybe not quite as talented. But anyway, we're really glad to have him here and to show this and to talk to us. Thank you. Oh, he's good. And after we'll have 30 minutes of the show, he'll say something now, I guess, at the introduction, and then we'll ask questions afterwards.
I'll take your mic. Yeah, great. Yeah, no, I'm going to go with the handheld. I decided that thing on my head felt a little weird. And I've been instructed to stay behind the podium. I am wearing pants, but they wanted me to stay here because they're filming or taping part of this, and I can't wander. Well, thank you very much for the generous introduction. I can't imagine I'm really anybody's hero, but we have a lot of fun doing Mossback's Northwest. And I'll tell you just briefly, it came about, I was writing for Crosscut, the website, and in 2015, Crosscut merged with Channel 9, KCTS. And now the whole entity is now called Cascade PBS, so we've rebranded. And but one of the people came up to me and said, people in the building here think you'd be good on television. And I thought, they're nuts. You know, I've never aspired to be on television. I don't have a television face. I just, I'm not what you usually see on TV. And they said, well, if you did something, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I would like to talk about local history. I'd like to show artifacts. And they said, well, that sounds great. Let's start. And so it was literally, in the beginning, one guy with a camera and me sitting in a weird room, and he would interview me, and then he would cut it together to look like I was doing a presentation. And we always had some kind of interesting artifact to help tell the story. So we started doing these in 2018. We just, in fact, this Thursday night at 8:50 on broadcast, we just finished, we'll be finishing the final episode of season 10. So this is our 10th season. Thank you. In the beginning, these things were what they called interstitials. And that basically meant stuff you stick between the real programming. But people liked them, and the one thing we heard back was we'd like them to be longer, and we would like them to be in the program guide. We'd like to know when they're airing, because originally we just stuck them in wherever they fit. So we're now in the program guide, and we've stretched now to, well, they're about 8 to 10 minutes long. And the feedback we keep getting is go longer, do longer. I don't know if we'll be able to do that in the near term, but it's something we're interested in. So tonight, I wanted to show you a documentary that we made this last year. It's not a Mossback episode, but I was a co-producer and do the narration. And it's about the Washington State Historical Society's Asahel Curtis project. And even back in the day, nobody knew how to pronounce Asahel's name. It's spelled Asahel, and people call Asahel and all kinds of variations of ass. But the family says it's Asahel, so we stick with that. And Asahel Curtis was the brother of Edward S. Curtis. They worked together back in the 1890s. They had a huge falling out over pictures that Asahel took in the Klondike, and his brother Edward took credit for them. And some members of the family say there was probably something else to it that had to do with a woman. But I've not been able to verify that, but that's the family rumor. Asahel Curtis started his own photographic studio. So from the late 1890s, he worked with Edward for a while, and then from the late 1890s until his death in the early 1940s, he took images of everything in the Pacific Northwest. Schools, logging, industry, portraits of ethnic people. He took pictures of sofas for ads for the downtown department stores. When he died, he just left this vast trove that captures 50 years of development in the Northwest from the 1890s to the 1940s. It's an extraordinary collection. And fortunately, that collection was purchased by the state of Washington. The Washington State Historical Society got a grant from the legislature, and in the early 1940s, they were able to purchase his entire collection, the negatives and everything. And over the years, they've made about 3,000 of those images available to the public. There's 60,000 images in the collection. Now, scholars have sifted through many of them. Archivists have looked at, tried to categorize some of what they are. But they have everything. They have the original negatives, the glass plates. They have his handwritten index cards saying what each photo was. They were numbered so they can catalog, and you'll find out a bit more about this in the documentary. I do a weekly newsletter called the Mossback Den. It goes to people who are members of Cascade PBS. And I did a little thing about Asahel Curtis, and I started getting mail from people saying, "Oh, gee, we have a bunch of Asahel Curtis colored lantern slides in our garage." Or people said, "Gee, I looked in the family album and I found some Asahel Curtis photographs. Can you help me understand what they are? Are they important?" I advised them to contact the Washington State Historical Society, and I contacted them myself. And in the course of that, they said, "Well, gee, we're just starting this project to digitize all of those photographs, and when they're digitized, we want to have a discrete website where they'll be searchable and available to the public for free." And so that's what they're doing. They've raised money, they're scanning images, and so this documentary you're about to see is kind of our contribution to the project, which was to make kind of a half-hour documentary about the project, why they're doing it, and show some of the incredible images that people will have much greater access to. So without further ado, why don't we show the Asahel Curtis project video.
The things that have taken me by surprise in this project are the everyday moments in time that Asahel Curtis captured. It's photos of families. It's photos of people rowing on a lake. It's people. We thought we would see the big buildings because we heard those were there. But those little moments of connections, when you are witnessing a child's birthday party in a park where all of them are wearing puff sleeves and bows in their hair, and you can still visit that park today, but look at that moment in time with that family. Those are the elements that I have been surprised at most as we've been doing this big project.
Old photos have mysterious qualities. When we look at these images taken more than a century ago, we're seeing actual moments in real people's lives, and we're capturing memories that would otherwise be long forgotten and buried. To reclaim images like these is to create a memory bank of generations over time, collectively telling the story of these people and this place.
Photography is just a window to the past. I think the further we get from these moments in the past, the harder it is to envision what it was like. And when you have original photos, you have the ability to step into that world And to focus on the tiniest things, what were they eating? What were they wearing? And each of those things that you can see in a photograph tells you about their life.
The Curtis Project here at the Washington State Historical Society is a broad project to provide access to 60,000 images that were taken between the 1890s and the 1940s by famed photographer Asahel Curtis. Asahel Curtis passed away in 1941 after a prolific and long career as a photographer in Washington. And the state legislature provided the Washington State Historical Society with funds to purchase the collection from the family of Asahel Curtis. About 3,000 of the images had been available to the public previously.
And this most recent effort to digitize the remainder of those images started in November 2022. We have 26,000 images digitized right now, and we'll keep going until we're done. If we're going to really capture the beauty of these images, we need to digitize them now before there's any further degradation of the original negatives.
And the more projects we can do like this to provide access to these materials, the more people will understand that we need to be preserving our history in this way. Unfiltered, uncensored history, not generated by anything other than a man with a camera.
Poring through Curtis's photos, one is left with so many questions about the countless people he met, what they were doing at the snap of his shutter, and the many places he visited and documented, the stories left untold. The images invite us to explore our connection to the past, to what we can learn by looking back.
For me, opening this drawer, I see endless possibilities of what can be here. This drawer is a mystery, and we get to unlock what that mystery is.
Asahel photographed a variety of natural landscapes in the Pacific Northwest. This image of a cattle herd at Grand Coulee exemplifies the drastic changes of some of these areas over the last 100 years. We wanted to see how hard it would be to capture an image like Curtis's with similar equipment. So we asked photographer Daniel Carrillo, who uses old photo techniques, to help us recreate one of these fascinating images under similar conditions.
This is where all the bellows and stuff are. I brought a few lenses. This is the rail for it.
Daniel's camera has many different parts that have to be assembled on location. This is no point and shoot.
And the whole system is supported by this one rail. I can get the camera up in probably about 5 minutes. So it's fairly easy to set up. This one's on the front. This is the 8x10 back. I did bring an extra set of bellows. The camera itself is just an empty box, basically. But the bellows are what makes it light tight, from the front to back. So this is a 300 millimeter lens. And then it's ready to shoot.
Before plastic-based film was invented, photographers had to spread light-sensitive emulsion onto glass plates. The format gave Curtis high-resolution images, but required precise timing and had a high potential for any number of environmental errors, like dust on the negative or an overexposed image.
So I brought these dry plates. This is how they go into the holder. They're shoved in.
Dry plate negatives introduced in the 1870s use a gelatin emulsion that can be prepared and stored before exposure. as well as delayed development that can take place in the more controlled environment of a darkroom or studio.
I've always liked the larger format. It's really kind of a slower process, which I appreciate. When you're composing a picture with the view camera, there's a lot of time to think about what you're doing, and there's a lot of opportunity to adjust and sort of figure out exactly how you want the picture to look. It's more satisfying. It was a lot of work to be a photographer back in the early 1900s. They had to haul around all this stuff. Those glass plates are super heavy. It's kind of cool to think about the amount of effort that was put into these photographs. Here's the rock. Looks great. You can actually see it. Yesterday there was a lot of haze and it was not good.
The Steamboat Rock area was transformed from dry prairie land to a lush place surrounded by water. That transformation didn't happen overnight.
After the turn of the 20th century, irrigation experts said, wouldn't it be great if we can pump the water from the Columbia up into this big natural reservoir and create an irrigation system? During the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt started one of the largest construction projects in the West in a place where there were virtually no people in the early 1930s. So then in 1951, when the pumps are finished and they start pumping water, they fill up the coulee. Steamboat Rock is a big basalt butte, 1,200 feet high, several miles long, that's at the northern end of the coulee. The environmental impact of Grand Coulee was amazingly huge, and some of it was really catastrophic and destructive and inhuman, almost genocidal. Lake Roosevelt, which was the name for the bloated up river behind the dam, flooded all of the traditional Native American fishing places, and it also wiped out the salmon. On the other hand, the consequences of the dam for the Pacific Northwest were equally amazing. There's almost a direct line from the construction of Grand Coulee to the growth of Boeing, to the Gates fortune, to Microsoft, to Amazon, and to the trillion-dollar wealth around the Pacific Northwest. They're very much interrelated.
There's something about having that image projected onto that ground glass that is very fascinating. Because it's upside down, you don't really think about it as whatever it is you're shooting. You sort of just look at shapes. Okay. So that's how Curtis viewed the world, through the ground glass and upside down.
At first, Asahel worked for his brother, photographer Edward Curtis, who had become famous for his portraits of North American indigenous peoples. In the late 1890s, Asahel spent 2 years in the harsh Canadian Yukon, dramatically documenting the Klondike Gold Rush. But Edward and Asahel parted ways permanently after a bitter disagreement over the credits to the Yukon photos, which Edward had published under his own name. Their bodies of work stand in marked contrast. Edward's stylized romantic photographs were of people he called a vanishing race. Asahel focused on a becoming people, the future. He did the unglamorous work of documenting daily life. His images opened a window into the ephemera of life in the early 20th century.
I'm going to do a hot take here and say Asahel Curtis was the lesser known, perhaps more talented Curtis brother. The way that he approached landscapes in Washington, this sort of natural beauty, is really incredible. I think you rarely find a photographer who touches on all of these different things, different industries, different people.
In 1911, Asahel started a studio in Seattle which was active for 30 years. He was a commercial photographer documenting the agricultural, timber, mining, and fishing industries of his time. Local businesses, organizations, and individuals hired him to take portraits and promotional photos.
In some cases, we have really great documentation about who they were, and in other instances, he didn't get as descriptive in his note-taking. So we have sailors, we have photographs of church choirs, photographs of schools. They are a glimpse into what a typical day was like for a person in that time period. A lot of other historic work is focused more on the big, broader picture, the more important things, the men. And Asahel Curtis saw it all, and he thought it was important enough to capture it all.
My grandparents, Anna and Henry Balke, moved to Grandview in the early 1920s. And it was touted as a great opportunity for people who are willing to work on an agricultural area with irrigation. And my father was a 7-year-old in the household. He was the youngest of the family. And their neighbor across the street was Mr. Curtis. He was familiar with the family and friend with my grandparents. And one day, my grandmother heard someone knock on the door. It was Mr. Curtis. He said, Anna, can I take a picture of Lloyd? Oh, well, sure. But let me get him in to get some decent clothes on. He said, no, I want him just like he is. And this is how he was. He was collecting eggs. That's kind of the context of that picture and other pictures that he took of our family during that time. And he grew up. My mom got a job in the steno pool, and she and my dad met, and then they got married. And she knew at that point that my dad had had a heart murmur as a child and probably wouldn't live beyond 21. Well, he lived to 46. I was 7, I was this age, when he passed away. And so all of us siblings who are all still alive really treasure this picture, and our parents all did. My kids know it's special to me too.
I think connecting to our past is really about empathy and being able to see people in the past as real people and to empathize with what they experienced, and through that empathy to gain understanding into our own experience.
It really is people's memories that we're getting to see.
It's great because I've never seen photos with this kind of clarity. I've seen probably 3rd, 4th generation images.
So what does it say here?
3 Japanese American women are photographed working in the Liberty Flower Shop owned by George Tanabe. I think 80 to 90% of the farmers at the Pike Place Market before World War II and the incarceration were Japanese American. And following the war, many Japanese Americans operated a lot of the floral shops in Seattle as well.
We hadn't looked at this photo of the Chinjihi building for a long time.
And usually what I look for is I look for the signs to see what businesses, and then I try to read the Chinese characters to figure out also kind of what the meaning is in Chinese. And there might be additional detail about what goods are being sold and so forth. A lot of it was housing for bachelor men, the laborers who came on the upper floors. Down below, they had import-export businesses, and there are also family associations, which were the organizations that the Chinese men created as surrogate families because they didn't have women here because of the exclusion law. And so it's where they hung out and gambled and socialized and got support, finding jobs and so forth. Most of them didn't make a whole lot of money. There's a lot of discrimination. They came here, as my grandfather did, and my father and uncles, 11, 12, 13 years old. They're like an adult, really needing to be self-sufficient. You have to realize we're coming here, there's nobody to take care of you. And you have to go to work. Chinese, they operate a lot of the laundries. Chinese restaurants that used to operate in the frontier West. They were given those skills by their mothers before they left for America.
Sometimes the photos may be the only record of them being here because there was the incentive not to leave a paper trail. The photographs are one of the last records we have.
In 1885, there's an anti-Chinese uprising in Seattle following the uprising in Tacoma, which I think was the previous year, where vigilante groups and even some city officials were part of a mob that wanted to oust the Chinese, feeling that they were taking jobs away from white laborers. And so the Chinese in Seattle were ousted. Some of them were able to stay under the protection of some of their white patrons. But it wasn't that long after that the Great Seattle Fire took place, and then it took down most of Seattle. I believe the Canton building was one of the first brick buildings built after the Great Seattle Fire. So irony of ousting the Chinese and then needing them to come back to help rebuild the city. We have this stereotype of Asian Americans as being foreigners. These photographs are the evidence of the diversity of this place where we now live.
It's always been a place where people come from all over the world to make a new home.
Each of Curtis's glass plates and nitrate negatives holds knowledge and stories of our past. The work of the archivists is delicate, to keep these materials safe while using technology to provide access.
Nitrate images are held in a temperature and humidity controlled chamber because they are flammable. So if we don't keep them at this sweet spot, they're prone to spontaneously combust.
All of the plates are in an archival sleeve, and they each have their number and if we know the date that it was taken and the subject matter. And we had these cabinets made specifically for them because they're so heavy. They take a very heavy duty cabinet. Asahel Curtis also kept handwritten note cards of everything that he took to go with every image that we have. Depending on the size of the negative, scanning can take 5 to 10 minutes per image. So it is a very time-consuming process. We can get through 100 scans per day per person who is scanning. But we don't do anything other than rotate and crop them because we are in the business of preserving history, not changing it.
Our history hasn't always been diverse, but the people have always been diverse. The stories are there if we look for them. And so the photos are just one more piece of evidence to support that.
When I look at these pictures, I look at these people, and then I wonder who these people are.
There's so much detail that's captured in the moment. A lot of times for historians, it's not even the topic of the photograph. There's the detail in the background. There's what people are doing and wearing. So they just draw me in.
We have a pretty long and deep history, and anytime we can recover some traces of that diversity, whether it's a small business sign that's in Chinese characters or some person from another country that you didn't realize actually was part of the settlement, then we reclaim what our true history is, and then we allow an opportunity to push back against folks who say, well, they don't belong here.
When we don't digitize things, they're invisible. It's like the box in your Aunt Linda's attic, right? If you don't know what's in it, it might as well not exist. And so it's about bringing the box down, laying it all out, making it available so that everyone knows what's there.
We go through different stages in life where we either care or don't care about our relatives who lived before us or even who are still living. I think that especially as we get older, your memories of relatives who've passed, that's the main way to connect with them. At one point, I wanted to make copies of this picture for my siblings, and the staff was just so helpful, and we got to see all those pictures that we'd never seen before. It was just astonishing to me that just in that 1 month, he had taken pictures in Seattle, some pictures at the University of Washington Husky Stadium being built for the first time. He took pictures in Pasco and Kennewick area of a bridge being built across the river. I'm looking forward to when they are completely digitized, to really just going through them and seeing where he went.
Aww. Now we're gonna develop the first set of exposures in the darkroom. See what we got. So the plates are usually in here, emulsion side down, so that's how I know. One side is just plain glass, and the other side's got the coating on it. In it goes. And we'll start the development time. It's 5 minutes. So I agitate for the first like 30 seconds. So this is a gelatin emulsion. It's gelatin with silver in it and a halide. This one's looking really good. Well, they're not perfect. There's lots of flaws. There's lots of even dust or whatever environment they were coating these plates in. We're not looking for anything that's perfect, just something that has a lot of character. And we do a rinse with some water to stop the development, and then it'll get fixed out for about 5 minutes. And then it gets washed for 20 minutes, 30 minutes to make sure we get any residual chemicals and silver out. What's cool is you can see the wind sort of coming over the water. It's pretty cool. This is a nice one. I'd say this is probably the best plate. This is my fun time. Very sort of rewarding too, when everything lines up and works, but that's few and far between. There's a lot of mistakes. All right, this goes in here to wash. But you have to be happy with the mistakes too and accept them as part of the process.
I feel like I know Hazel Curtis, although I never met him, and I realized how much he contributed to the goodness of things in our state by recording and by getting involved in projects that benefited the people and the state itself. Photography was a bigger deal for families in many ways than it is now. To go get a family photograph taken became very much a matter of communicating with relatives around the world and preserving in time moments of celebration, weddings, that sort of thing. So not so much now. I think we are more apt to discard old photos.
Today's day and age, we're dealing with things like artificial intelligence. We're dealing with the ability to manipulate images. No matter what, we will have this glass negative, this nitrate negative that shows the truth. And that truth is a primary resource, and it will always be there.
Every preservation TIFF we make from every nitrate negative or glass plate is a moment in history that can't be replicated with technology. It's a slice in time that really captures what that moment was like.
I think it's the closest thing to a time machine that we've invented. To have this cache of photos, the Asahel Curtis collection, becoming available, there's going to be an explosion of discovery, I think.
Since the birth of photography, it's just man's curiosity to sort of record what he sees for posterity, or even just for the sheer beauty of like nature. Man is a curious creature, you know, and they want to be able to record what they see.
We really can't wait to see everything that is here. You can see how much work this is. It's worth it because you don't know what treasure is going to be here. And what's going to be the most important thing in 100 years, we don't know. That's why I'm here. That's why museums exist. And that's why this project is so important to us.
The act of keeping and protecting is really important. I truly see it as a sort of democratization of historical information.
Photographs are a legacy. All those photographs are our history. People ought to be able to look into their history.
Let's digitize all of it and let history decide.
Each box in the collection has the power to teach us something about our past and perhaps about where we're going. But the longer these negatives wait in storage, the more vulnerable they are. There's so much to be gained by taking the boxes off the shelves and getting these photos out into the world. It's imperative for their future and ours. Well, I hope you like that. So, in the documentary, one of the things we did was try to find examples of where these photographs connected with communities and individuals. And after we finished the documentary, some months later, my sisters were going through a storage unit that contained a lot of material from my family, my late mother, and in it popped out this picture. They found this picture. And the tall gal in the middle with the garland is my aunt. The photographer, Asahel Curtis. And we had no idea this picture existed. Now, my aunt went, and my father, also her older brother, they went to John Muir Elementary School in Mount Baker. Any John Muir people here? Oh, hey, great. I went to John Muir as well. And this picture was taken probably around 1930-ish. I recognized where it was taken immediately. It was taken at John Muir. And the principal there at that time, Mrs. Lockwood, who was a very formidable presence, my father used to, quail and quiver in her presence when she lowered the boom. She was responsible for having the school named after John Muir because she was devoted to the idea of teaching children about nature. And there, on the John Muir grounds, there are several large sequoia trees that she had planted there. And one of the things that Mrs. Lockwood did was she would put on nature pageants. The students would perform in these nature pageants. This is in what was the lunchroom and theater of the old John Muir School. It's been torn down since, so it doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, and there my aunt is, I don't know what she is, the fairy queen, and you can see these gals dressed up as, I think they might be blue jays or something, flying around, and forest sprites. And it blew me away that we had this direct connection. My Aunt Barbara went on to be an actress who was on many soap operas. You may have seen her on The Guiding Light. As the World Turns, she was on both those shows. She was on Another World, where they killed her character off, and people were so outraged they brought her back as a ghost. She also performed in a number of Broadway plays, including The Best Man and Dylan with Sir Alec Guinness. So she went on to have a stage career, which I think is why this photograph probably came into my grandmother's possession and then got passed down and forgotten in a box. Like, what was it, Aunt Linda's attic? Just lost. Anyway, it was a big thrill to find out that I had this direct family connection, just like some of the folks in the film. Do you guys have any questions, or do you want to talk about the film or talk about Curtis? Anybody have any questions about it? Yes. Oh, you wait for a microphone.
What was your aunt's last name?
So her last name was Barbara Berger, but then she changed her stage name was also was Barbara Berger Foley. She married a guy named Lee Foley, who was a dance teacher here in Seattle, who also danced in Paris and was a choreographer and whatnot. So her name shows up as Barbara Berger with a J. She hated people saying Berger. And And so Barbara Berger Foley, and Barbara Berger with a J was her stage name over the years. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Should I go ahead?
Yeah.
I'm over here. Hello.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, oh, I can stand up and get beyond the organ. You had some little cards that were shown at one point. So how much documentation do you have about why he was here and there? And I'm especially wondering why he was there, but also, you know, there must be some record of him moving around and why he took these pictures.
Right. Well, the pictures are largely numbered chronologically. So they're going through the collection really from the earliest to the later. Everything pretty much before the early 1920s are glass plates, and then the nitrate film kicks in the 1920s to the 1940s. And that's the volatile stuff that is the reason we hardly have any of our old silent movies. The stuff spontaneously combusts. The amazing thing is, because they're chronologically numbered and recorded, you can follow his travels around the state. And it's amazing. I mean, he was taking trains, he was driving. It was not easy to get around the state in the aughts. He was a very intrepid guy. Not only did he spend time in the Klondike, he was one of the founders of the Mountaineers. He was also one of the prime proponents of Mount Rainier National Park in getting that designated. He was a proponent of a version of Olympic National Park. He wanted one that was much smaller because he didn't want to see the timber cutters put out of a job. In his relationship with Mount Rainier, he was a huge advocate of building roads into Mount Rainier. So the reason they paved the road to Paradise, the reason they brought in a road from the north and made it more accessible, was largely due to the advocacy of Asahel Curtis. And environmentalists had a divided opinion about his latter part of his advocacy for some of these things. And he was, when you think about where he was and how many places he went, and the travel from Oregon, Washington, Idaho, British Columbia, northern British Columbia. He was advocate of building a road from Seattle to Alaska, and did a number of trips up there promoting this potential highway. He was all over the place, and lugging that equipment around just blows my mind. There's one photo showing him with hammering something. So I think it's one of the first photos you see. He's building one of these heavy wooden boxes to carry the glass plate negatives. You know, imagine taking that over, Dead Horse Pass or something up in Alaska or the Yukon. Yes, over here.
So on that subject, where is the Asahel Curtis Nature Trail, and is there a connection to this documentary?
The Asahel Curtis Nature Trail is off I-90 as you go up to Snoqualmie Pass. There'll be a sign, a brown sign, that says Asahel Curtis Nature Trail. It's before you get to Snoqualmie Pass on this side. And it's interesting because it was named after him after he died. Was named after him, and he was actually cremated, and a box of his remains were put under the sign, a stone cairn, to mark the nature trail. And in the early 1960s, a storm, a bolt of lightning, hit the cairn and scattered his ashes. So he's literally part of the trail now. So, what a dramatic exit. Yes, sir.
These photographs are great and should be preserved as they are. But this really came to life when you told us the story of the principal, and was it your father who quailed at her presence, and the story of these people, and the story of that young child was so interesting when you learned that he died when he was 47.
Yeah.
So it seems to me some effort should be made to collect as much as is possible the stories associated. What was she up to with that play? It's more than an image. As history, it's embedded in a much richer story that it'd be lovely to have collected.
You're absolutely right. I contributed to that in a very small way, which was for about a year and a half while we were kind of co-sponsoring this project. In my weekly newsletter, once a month, I would feature a brand new Curtis image that they had scanned, and I would research the story behind it and do exactly what you were talking about. And in fact, there's a photograph that was in the documentary that showed a bunch of school children sitting on a bank holding birdhouses. Well, the story behind, I did a whole episode on that photo, or that was based on that photo, because it turned out, we found from his notes, it was taken in, I think it was 1905 at the Queen Anne Elementary School. Now called, it later was called the West Queen Anne Elementary School. And the principal of that school was a woman named Adelaide Lowry Pollock. And Adelaide Lowry Pollock was a very formidable educator, a very well-educated educator, and she believed that students had to study birds. And she had in her classes, and Curtis took pictures of this too, he took pictures of students learning about birds, and she or the other teachers would take these kids on field trips. And there's actually a map where they went to the Mount Pleasant Cemetery on Queen Anne Hill and recorded all the bird nests they found and what species of bird. Pollock wrote several books on birds. She also quit. She was principal of the school. She was one of the highest in the hierarchy of Seattle Public School teachers. She quit and went to France during World War I and worked for the Red Cross and for the Army and others, teaching and doing educational work with soldiers. And later, she came back to Seattle, didn't go back into education, and she was the catalyst for the founding of the Ida Culver House. And Ida Culver House was designed originally to house school teachers and to provide them with a retirement because they didn't have any benefits, they didn't have Social Security, they didn't have anything, and that's where Ida Culver House. So she had an amazing impact, and that's all because I wondered, why are these kids, school kids, sitting there with these homemade birdhouses? And that was one of their projects, was to make birdhouses. She was really big on, we have to protect the birds in the city of Seattle. So I learned a whole ton about what birds were here in 1905.
Earlier, Knute was saying he was considering he'd like to move to Horizon House. You need to move here and be part of the neighborhoods committee. And then you could do all
Right, well, there you go.
More questions.
Anybody have any questions about Mossback or what's coming up or what we're doing and why? How?
Nice try, Knute. No, we want to talk about it. Did he have a family? Did he marry? Did he have kids, or was he?
Yes. Yeah. He married.
He had time for it.
He had offspring. He had. I can't remember what happened to them all, but the family kind of diffused over time. He and Edward Curtis never spoke again after their falling out. And at one point, I think one of the reasons that they were estranged was Asahel Curtis felt like he had to take care of the extended family, their mother, for example, and that Edward kind of ran off on this project, was running around, wasn't providing any financial support or anything to the rest of the family, doing his own thing. And there was a point at which Asahel went down to California, Los Angeles, to talk to his brother, and the door was opened, slammed in his face, and that was it, but they never spoke. So it was a very serious falling out. One of the things that was so interesting, we had done an episode of Mossback on Asahel Curtis. We called it The Other Curtis Brother. This was a few years ago. And just trying to kind of bring his work and what his contribution was. And you can really see it in how they photographed indigenous people. Edward Curtis's were very gauzy, very romantic. They've drawn a lot of criticism today because many of the images that he showed were inaccurate, where he used costumes for people to wear to present it as authentic. So from an anthropological standpoint, those works have been criticized, and his whole notion that Native people were vanishing as opposed to being extremely resilient. Asahel Curtis took pictures of Native people as they were at the time. He photographed them, and there's a fabulous series of pictures he took of the Macaw whalers in the 1920s or teens up at Nia Bay. And they're wearing overalls, and they're not dressed in cedar garments and using harpoons. They're using every bit of modern technology they can in their canoes, doing their traditional hunting. Asahel would take pictures of hop pickers, and you would see how they lived and what they wore. So they're a great contrast, and I think in terms of historic value, I think Asahel Curtis's photos are much more important.
The techniques of photography at that time were, of course, evolving dramatically, Skip. So where did the Curtis brothers learn their technology to develop their art?
They were basically self-taught. They moved out from the Midwest to Kitsap County. They had a farm there with their parents. And Asahel was the younger brother. Edward was the older brother. He got interested in photography and ended up getting a camera and starting to take pictures. And of course, Seattle at that time didn't have a lot of photo studios. And it turned out he was very good at taking pictures. And he hired or had Asahel work with him as an assistant. So they worked together for some years. And that's where Asahel, I think, learned the basics, he and his brother working together. Most of the photographs from the Edward Curtis studio were lost at some point. It's suspected that some of the family just dumped them all at some point. And occasionally, if you look in an old magazine or newspaper from early in the 20th century, you'll see an interesting studio picture. I did a story on the sort of boom in bicycles in the early 20th century, and there was a great picture of a portrait of a cyclist taken by Edward Curtis, but I could not find the original. None of the stuff exists, and I think his original practice was kind of like Asahel's. In that he would do anything. Anybody that walked in the studio and needed a portrait or a commercial photograph, he would take. But all of that was lost. And he put all of his energy into his portfolio of the American Indian. Yes?
how much of this huge variety was his personal passion, and how much of it was associated with the economics of being a photographer? Was it the studio in Seattle that supported all of these trips, or did people ask him, invite him to come?
I think his passion changed. So originally his passion was the outdoors. It was the mountaineers. It was climbing. It was hiking. And the record of that, the photographic record of the early outdoors movement in Washington is very rich because Asahel Curtis went on all these expeditions and took pictures. And it was integrally involved in the creation of these organizations. I think when he got into commercial photography, he was in it for the money, but he also developed interests, and I think they were passionate interests, in economic development. He felt that the Northwest had to be economically viable, the resource economy needed to be taken seriously, and so he kind of embodied this dual feeling that a lot of us have about the Northwest, which is yay Boeing, but we also love the environment, don't want anything changed. I think there was a kind of contradiction in him, and then there is a lot of material that's clearly just commercial, and he did it very workmanlike, but I can't imagine that he was enjoying it particularly. But I think he had a very strong sense of craft, and that shows through even in some of the most mundane photographs. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he actually pioneered some interesting techniques. One thing we didn't talk about is he helped do large-scale photographs for the 1939 New York World's Fair, the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, the 1939 San Francisco World's Fair, the Golden Gate Exposition. And there was a photograph in the documentary that shows him developing a portion of a large picture of downtown Seattle. I don't know if you saw that, but there was a big metal bin, and he's leaning over it, and there's a photograph that's like 5 feet by 4 feet in there. He developed a technique for blowing up photos to wall size. And if you look at the detail, the resolution, particularly of the glass plate stuff, you can literally blow that up to be on the side of a building and it will not lose anything. So he developed a technique for making these giant prints, which were then put up in the Washington pavilions at these various World's Fairs. And because it was pre-color photography, or he couldn't do color photography at that scale, no one was doing it at that scale, he worked with artists who would come in and paint the images to make them full color. And there was a woman artist whose name I don't remember, who came in and worked on some of these murals. So he did a lot in kind of furthering certain commercial techniques. I think he was a tinkerer. And I think he would almost have to be to do what he did. Well, I think we're at our time limit. Yeah, I'll hang around for a few minutes, though, if anybody wants to chat about the film.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.